of behind. There's the recording. Thank you all for joining us. It's very refreshing to see that people have any room left in their brains for something that doesn't have to do with the American elections or the ongoing war in Israel. Preparing my presentation for this evening gave me an opportunity to focus on things that aren't about Israel's ongoing war and aren't about American elections. So let's, I won't say that this will be an escape, but for some of us, it will be for some of us, it will be a refresher course in things that we already know, that you've heard before. I hope that I will be able to present some things that you don't know, but still be able to give you some documentation for things that you may already know or have suspected or have heard, but don't know exactly what the source is. So what we're going to try to look at tonight are the legal underpinnings having to do with international law as it applies to Judea and Samaria. And to answer a very simple question, is Israel illegally occupying the West Bank, East Jerusalem? I won't even add what has often been said. That means that specifically referring to the Gaza Strip, because Israel has not been present in the Gaza Strip for years until, unfortunately, it was forced to re-enter the Gaza Strip. But we're going to discuss this evening what the law actually says about Israel's rights or lack of such in the territories that are known either as Judea and Samaria. They're biblical names and the only names that existed until 1949, but were invented, and we'll talk about that as well. What is or the West Bank? Is the West Bank actually a thing? That's a corollary question. So I'm going to share my screen now and show you some slides. Again, as always, I'm happy to try to answer questions. If you have questions, put them in the chat at the bottom of your screen, and I'll try to collect them all for the end of the presentation. Like all of our webinars, this is being recorded. So afterwards, we send out a link, which I encourage you, if you see fit, to share with friends. At the end of the presentation, there will also, as always, be a screen that shows you many different ways to follow Regavim and stay abreast of developments and hear about our activities, new cases, new events, new opinion, and new webinars as they become available. So let's see if I can share my screen here somehow. Sorry, I'm having technical difficulties this evening. Yes, here we go. Sure. We want this one. Okay. Now you should see that. Yes. Okay. So again, Israel, occupier or owner, Judea and Samaria in international law. What I will tell you before we go any further is the reason I chose this topic is because I'm actually up to my neck in it right now. Several years ago, actually quite a few years ago, Regavim, I don't know if you can even see this with my crazy background. Regavim published a massive legal tome in Hebrew, a collection of articles about international law and Israel's rights in Judea and Samaria. And it's a groundbreaking work. It's on the curriculum of Israeli law school programs, and it is super important material. Unfortunately, it had not been translated into English until now, and that's what I'm working on practically as we speak. So hopefully we will be able to bring these very, very important articles by leading experts in international law to the greater public outside of Israel, around the world, jurists, judges, politicians, activists. So keep your eyes peeled for this. You can't see it, sorry. And when it is available, I'm sure that we will publicize that widely. But much of what I have to say this evening, it barely holds a candle to all of the scholarly work that is in this volume. So I'm looking forward to working on it and bringing it to you as the days go by. So the first thing that we need to discuss when we talk about, when we talk about this topic is, what is international law? Who wrote international law? Where is it written? Where can you read international law? And who decides? Who interprets that law? Who adjudicates that law? So this is a trick question, because between us, just between you and me, there really isn't any such thing as international law. International law is essentially a fabricated term, a very, very recent term, and a term almost exclusively used against the state of Israel. There are, in fact, certain documents that have the standing of law, but there is no corpus of law that is internationally agreed upon. There are certain conventions, there are certain diplomatic protocols, and there are certain other things that have been accepted as having the status of law, but all of these are consensual. The only thing that actually constitutes international law is treaties that are signed and ratified between states. Nothing else actually has any standing whatsoever, which is interesting because so much of what we're hearing in recent years about international law and about international tribunals and all of those things aren't being conducted by states and aren't necessarily based on treaties between two states, but are being adjudicated in international fora that have been created recently and have jurisdiction only when the contracting parties agree to give them jurisdiction. So keep in mind that international law is a fiction, and the only thing that actually exists is treaties. And we're going to look at some of the treaties that have formed the current international map of the Middle East and see where that leaves us. So there are certain basic documents, and I'm going to give you a spoiler alert here, because when we finish this evening, this slide will be clear. All existing documents, meaning all the treaties that exist that have to do with the state of Israel's existence and its borders and its boundaries and its international obligations and agreements, all existing documents declare that ownership of Judea and Samaria and Jerusalem is held exclusively by the Jewish people. These documents constitute a legally binding land deed, a deed of ownership to all land west of the Jordan River up to the Mediterranean Sea. And those borders were created by a series of internationally recognized, ratified acts that have the standing of international law. So together, I'd like to look at some of these documents with you and see where they lead us. The very first one is the Balfour Declaration. Now, the Balfour Declaration is much maligned and purposefully misinterpreted or misunderstood, sometimes acrobatically misconstrued even. But the truth of the matter is, it's a very short statement. We're going to read it together, but this is a picture of Lord Balfour that you see here, and the actual copy of the letter sent to the Jewish Zionist representative, the representative of the Jewish people that were involved at that time. It was sent to Chaim Weizmann through Lord Rothschild by the British government. And it said very, very important things in very, very concise language. We're going to read that language together, but I will point out that years and years later, decades later, there was an attempt to reinterpret or to actually twist some of these very, very simple and straightforward statements to say something else, and it never succeeded. So what does it actually say? First of all, keep in mind, the Balfour Declaration, well, let's read it together. His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. That is the entirety of the Balfour Declaration. So what does it say and what doesn't it say? And why was this such an important thing? It was just a declaration of the British government's agreement with Zionist aspirations, essentially. Or was it? It was something much, much more than that. And that is what I've tried to lay out in the next slide. The Balfour Declaration was the first official recognition by a state, and actually by an empire at the time, of Jewish national and political rights in the land of Israel, in Palestine, since the time of the Babylonian exile. For the first time in 1800 years, Jewish national and political rights were recognized by one of the superpowers at the time. Even one might say the superpower at the time. Now, this would have been all very nice and very easily ignored, except for what happened next. What happened next, this is the text. I wrote it out here so you could see it easily, but it's the exact same text that we just read. Another thing that we should note from the language here is that the only national group, the Jewish people are the only national group that have recognized rights here. And all other non-Jewish residents of the territory in question were clearly not considered a national entity. They had no nationality. They were part of minority communities and were expected to maintain their particular civil and religious rights as individuals or communities, but not national rights. And there was no question about this. This was never contested by anyone who read the Balfour Declaration. And how do we know this? By what happened next. The Arabs at the time objected to the Balfour Declaration. The Balfour Declaration was issued at a time where the context of the whole thing was that the world powers were trying, under the United States stewardship, were trying to stamp out colonialism and to divest all of the empires of their colonial holdings. That included Germany and France and Great Britain. All of these countries had colonies all over the place, and they were actually abusing and exploiting indigenous peoples, and were creating a whole lot of mess, as the world is still paying for some of that mess. But the overriding principle was a principle of self-determination for national indigenous nations. The Arabs at the time did object to the Balfour Declaration on the grounds that it contradicted the principle of self-determination. But they did not say, we demand Palestinian self-determination, we demand a Palestinian state. Quite the opposite. What they demanded was recognition that they were part of the Kingdom of Syria, that they had a king of their own who was sitting in Damascus, and Palestine was not a thing. And what they said very, very clearly was, there is no Palestine, there is only Greater Syria. And we are part of the Arab nation of Greater Syria. We all have one king, and we object to this concept that we are now not considered subjects of the king of Greater Syria. There was never any mention at the time of any kind of Palestinian nationhood, indigeneity, or anything of the kind. They had no problem with the idea of the Jewish people as a nation, but what they said was they were part of a larger Arab nation. So, when the Balfour Declaration was drafted, what did they consider Palestine? Let's go back a moment, go back a few slides to the language of the Balfour Declaration. His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. So where is this Palestine? What are the borders of this Palestine? You can't make a declaration like that without knowing what the territory is that you're referring to. And so very, very often, unfortunately, constantly, what you will hear from anti-Israel voices in the world, even today, is Israel doesn't have recognized borders. That opens the door for all kinds of things. So that's actually completely false. This is the first map. This is the map that was sitting in front of Lord Balfour and His Majesty's government when they made the Balfour Declaration. This was a map that was drawn up by the world's most famous and most respected cartographers of the time, Smith and Bartholomew. They put together an atlas, and this was the atlas of the Holy Land. And everything that you see in pink over there, they delineated. If you look closely, you'll see what's written there. It's the names of the 12 tribes of Israel. So they put down on a map everything that was Palestine and showed where and why it was Palestine, because the 12 tribes of Israel had historically lived in these areas. Now, look with me, if you will. I don't know if you can see my cursor on the screen. This is the Kinneret, the Sea of Galilee. This is the Dead Sea, the Sea of Arabia, they call it here. This is the Jordan River and the Jordan Valley. This is the west side of the Jordan. This is the east side of the Jordan, right? This is Palestine, is both sides of the Jordan. And there was no question that this was Palestine. So when the Balfour Declaration said that it saw that His Majesty's government favored the creation of a Jewish homeland in Palestine, this, both sides of the Jordan, is what they were talking about. Now, the next thing that happened after the Balfour Declaration and after the end of the First World War and after various treaties dividing up the former Ottoman Empire were signed and ratified, we come to a point where the war is over and the League of Nations is constituted, more or less, at around the same time. The covenant of the League of Nations is the moment that the Balfour Declaration shifts from being an expression of policy by the British government to a matter of law. Because the covenant of the League of Nations, the closest thing, the first actual real document of international law that we can point to, the first body that embodied international law, this covenant incorporated within it the Balfour Declaration, recognizing that the Jewish people are indigenous to Palestine, that they have national and political rights to that territory that are exclusive, and that the Ottoman Empire is no more, that there are no other sovereign claims to this territory. So we're going to look more closely at this covenant. But the most important part for us, aside from the first 21 articles, is that Article 22 of the Covenant of the League of Nations created a mandate system. They decided that there were communities in different stages of development that needed to become independent, but some that were more likely or more capable and others that were less capable. We're talking about East Africa, and we're talking about all sorts of other places on the globe. But this is the actual language of the Covenant of the League of Nations, Article 22. certain communities formerly belonging to the Turkish Empire have reached a stage of development where their existence as independent nations can be provisionally recognized, subject to the rendering of administrative advice and assistance by a mandatory until such time as they are able to stand alone. So, in plain language, what that means is there were communities already existing on the ground in certain territories that were de facto states. They were more or less capable of being independent. Some were more, some were less. And what they needed was oversight and administrative advice and assistance so that they could become independent countries. That's June of 1919. Soon thereafter, the League of Nations, all of the victorious powers, actually, the Big Four, Big Five. Well, sorry, I want to go back here just to point out, one thing, very important to point out. The United States of America was not a member of the League of Nations at this time, for various reasons, mostly because of isolationism. The Americans objected to the clauses that would require them to join a war in defense of other signatory nations in case of war, and did not want to be dragged into other people's wars. So they did not sign the Covenant of the League of Nations. They were observers. The truth of the matter is, and I'll hopefully show you as we move on, eventually the United States adopted the precise language of the Covenant and Article 22 and incorporated it into U.S. law under the U.S. Constitution, Article 6. So it's U.S. law as well, but that happened in a separate act of Congress because they could not get the required majority to ratify joining the League of Nations in 1919. That's just a side point. Doesn't change the framework. The next thing that happened was the San Remo resolutions. The Paris Conference and various other post-war conferences that dismembered essentially the Ottoman Empire convened, and in a series of treaties that resulted in the San Remo resolutions of April 1920, all of this became legally binding in an even more effective way. The San Remo resolutions of 1920 established Palestine as a national legal entity. Before that, it was an area, a region, it was something theoretical, and in San Remo, this became a legal entity with very, very particular laws, administration, etc. It incorporated and gave legal status to the Balfour Declaration as well. So, and again, that comes with the map that had existed before. And it specified three very particular types of, three very particular areas that were called Class A mandates. As I had mentioned before, different countries were in different states of readiness for independence. The three Class A mandates, the highest form of mandate, were recognized, were created essentially, were agreed upon at San Remo. They were exclusively former Ottoman Empire territories that had de facto governments and independence and were functioning at a level that was really just on the cusp of national independence. They were created as Class A mandates. And this is where things begin to get interesting. The Class A mandates were Syria, that included the territory that is now known as Lebanon, Mesopotamia, which was eventually renamed Iraq, and Palestine. Once again, each of these mandates came with a map. Each of these mandates had recognized borders that were negotiated between the powers and were set aside under binding international law. The territory that was incorporated in each mandate was set aside by international law as to, the territory of the government that, the state that would be created, the independent state that would emerge after the mandate was completed. So if Syria had a map and Iraq had a map, guess what? Palestine had a map too. And the countries of the world recognized, ratified all of this, and Palestine had internationally recognized borders, the borders that would become the borders of the nascent state of the Jewish people. What was the map, and what were they going to, and what did they ratify? And here I have what you see on your screen now is, to the left, you might not recognize him, but that's Dr. Chaim Weizmann. And to his right, Faisal. They signed an agreement regarding Palestine. Keep in mind that at this time, I'm going to read to you the words, and this is a fascinating document, and there's a lot to be said about all of this, but His Royal Highness, the Emir Faisal, representing and acting on behalf of the Arab Kingdom of Hijaz, which is all of the Arab territory of the Middle East, that included the Syrian Empire, whatever they called it at the time, it eventually fell apart, and Dr. Chaim Weizmann, representing and acting on behalf of the Zionist organization, mindful of the racial kinship and ancient bonds existing between the Arabs and the Jewish people, and realizing that the surest means of working out the consummation of their national aspirations is through the closest possible collaboration in the development of the Arab state and Palestine. Now, again, there's the Arab state and there's Palestine, Palestine being the Jewish state, right? Closest possible collaboration in the development of the Arab state and Palestine, and being desirous further of confirming the good understanding which exists between them, have agreed upon the following articles. The Arab state and Palestine, in all their relations and undertakings, shall be controlled by the most cordial goodwill and understanding, and to this end, Arab and Jewish duly accredited agents shall be established and maintained in their respective territories. In the establishment of the constitution and administration of Palestine, all such measures shall be adopted as will afford the fullest guarantees for carrying into effect the British government's declaration of the 2nd of November, 1917. That's the Balfour Declaration. In other words, this too authorizes the Balfour Declaration as law. All necessary measures will be taken to encourage and stimulate immigration of Jews into Palestine on a large scale, and as quickly as possible to settle Jewish immigrants upon the land through close settlement, actually, and intensive cultivation of the soil. In taking such measures, the Arab peasants and tenant farmers shall be protected in their rights and shall be assisted in forwarding their economic development. Yes, so sounds like a messianic vision, but this was exactly the declaration that was presented at San Remo and was ratified by the nations of the world, the victorious powers. It came with a map. Here is the map, and you see it in Arabic because Faisal presented it. This was the portion of the Middle East that would not be Arab territory. This was Palestine, the Jewish state, to which the Arabs agreed. So let's look at it carefully. I don't read Arabic, you don't read Arabic, it doesn't matter. We know what the map of Israel looks like. Once again, we know where the Kinneret is, we know where the Jordan is, we know where the Dead Sea is. We know what is west of the Jordan. We know what is east of the Jordan. We know that this is the exact same area that appeared in the map of the 12 tribes that was the basis of the Balfour Declaration. There was no change. This dotted line that you see here was the Hijaz Railway, and that was for all parties concerned, for the British, for the French, for the Arabs, and for the Jews, the agreed upon border of Palestine, Jewish Palestine, up to the Hijaz Railway, which means that both the west bank of the Jordan and the east bank of the Jordan, certain territories on the east bank as well, were all part of what was agreed upon for the Jewish state. Yes, and I brought you here on the screen. What you see is the last page of that Weizmann-Faisal agreement, their signatures down here. This is the first page, this is the last page, as we read it, and their signatures, and that is it. That's the story, right? So what happened? Because we know that this isn't the map. It didn't remain the map. Then comes the next step. The fourth document, the League of Nations Mandate for Palestine. Now, very, very often you will hear people refer to the British Mandate for Palestine. That is a misnomer. It was not the British Mandate for Palestine. It was the League of Nations Mandate for Palestine that was administered by a mandatory called Great Britain. So the League of Nations agreed, based on everything that had come before, based on the Balfour Declaration, based on the San Remo Treaty, based on the Covenant of the League of Nations, to carve up and to carve out specific responsibilities of the mandatory power and to lay them out in law so that there would be no misunderstandings. So the mandate for Palestine was published in 24th of July, 1922. This is the first page of it. And that is the original document. And this is essentially the punchline. This is what we have to keep in mind moving forward. It starts, the preamble starts like this. Whereas recognition has thereby been given to the historical connection of the Jewish people with Palestine and to the grounds for reconstituting their national home in that country. This is the preamble to the Mandate for Palestine. There is no mention of any other nationality. There is no mention of national rights for any other people. And what is very, very important here is to note, first of all, that the historic connection of the Jewish people to this piece of territory is incorporated in the law. That's number one. And number two, it's not for creating a Jewish state, it's for reconstituting a national home. That means this acknowledges Jewish indigeneity to this territory. That is extremely important. And what is more important, perhaps, when you're talking about international law, is aside from recognizing Jewish indigeneity, it recognizes no other indigeneity. So this mandate, all of this referred to, once again, a piece of territory, and of course came with a map. Now, an interesting thing happened to the map. Remember what we saw before? This was the map that the Jews and the Arabs agreed upon and that the San Remo Conference accepted. But when it came down to it, the mandate itself, the map of the mandate for Palestine looked like this. And that is a shocking difference because the original mandate map, the original map ended here, and all of this was added in. And I will show you by what power that happened. But first, we have to stress why it happened. So the other mandates were here in the neighborhood, right? So there was the Syria and Mesopotamia. And the Syria included Lebanon and Syria, essentially. This was one of the Class A mandates. This was the second, and this was the third. The point here was to take a chunk of territory that had belonged to the French or was under French jurisdiction out of their hands. So it wasn't because the British wanted Palestine, the Jewish homeland, to be double its size. It's because they wanted the French-held territories to be half their size. And that is precisely what they did. Then, by creating this huge piece of territory, the British were able to do what they should not have been able to do, and that was an amendment to the mandate. Here it is. Article 25 of the Palestine Mandate, territory known as Transjordan, all of that stuff that they added on to the east of the Jordan, they now gave it a name, right? And that was Transjordan. The Secretary General has the honor to communicate for the information of the members of the League a memorandum relating to Article 25 of the Palestine Mandate. Here it comes. Article 25 of the Mandate for Palestine provides as follows. In the territories lying between the Jordan and the eastern boundary of Palestine, let's go back and look at that a minute, hold on. Between the Jordan, that's this, and the eastern boundary of Palestine, meaning all the way up to the Mesopotamia Mandate, or Iraq, right? What did they say? Oops, sorry, went the wrong way. And the eastern boundary of Palestine as ultimately determined, because it wasn't yet determined, the mandatory shall be entitled with consent of the Council of the League of Nations to postpone or withhold application of such provisions of this mandate as he may consider inapplicable to the existing local conditions. In other words, although the mandatory power was prohibited from changing the borders of the territory that was placed in their trust, the British added in a clause that said, we're not going to change the borders, we're simply not going to apply the mandatory rules to the east of the Jordan. That was in order to enable them to do what they did next, which was, to create a new country, which they had absolutely no right to do. And here it is. The document that you're looking at here was from a, this is a British document that was taken, it's a cabinet document that was presented there immediately after the clause 25, Article 25 that we just read was submitted, and this is it. So what did they do? What are they showing here? This is the land promised as a national home for the Jewish people. That's this, right? All the way to here. You notice the lines go all the way. This is the area that has been detached. This. Well, all of this. And everything here was taken away from the original mandate, the detached area from the national home, in favor of the Arab national, constituting the first partition of Palestine. The first two-state solution, this is the map. So what they have shown here is that all of this territory to the east of the Jordan was taken away from the originally promised Jewish homeland and given in favor of this new Arab country. Okay, so all of this obviously was done by the mandatory, and the state of Israel, having not existed at the time, had very little to say about it. But this is the last and only existing map of the borders, internationally recognized borders between Israel, the Jewish homeland, and Transjordan, which became the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, or the Arab homeland in Palestine, because this is still Palestine. This was all of it Palestine, right? So we have the Arab state of Palestine, we have the Jewish homeland of Palestine, and this area which was taken away. Also note, again, this is the Jordan. That's the line of the Jordan. This is the Kinneret up here. This is the Dead Sea over here. Everything to the west of the Jordan was recognized internationally with this map in 1922 as the state of the Jewish people. No map, I'm going to say this 2 times, 3 times so that you get it. There is no map after this map. There were no changes to the internationally recognized borders made after this map was published and received confirmation as law by the League of Nations. Okay, so if you want an actual internationally recognized map of the borders of Jordan and of Israel and of Syria, essentially, although this is really no longer accurate, this is the map, and there is no other. I have another version of it here, which will be a little more easy to see. Here it is. This also shows you the Golan Heights, which was illegally ceded by Great Britain to the French mandate in order to make up for them taking all of this. So the Golan Heights was also supposed to be part of this arrangement, and it was supposed to go like this. See this blue line? That was all the area that was originally agreed upon, right? Up to the Hijaz Railway, which went all the way up here. But instead, we ended up with this division, right? So this, despite everything else, this is the only internationally recognized eastern border of the Jewish state. So a few more things that I want to touch upon now that we've seen the documents, and those are the sum total of international law regarding the state of Israel and its rights in Judea and Samaria. These are the only existing documents. These are the only documents that have legal standing. They are treaties signed and ratified by the nations of the world and recognized by all the parties concerned. But in addition to that, yeah, we'll go back this way. In addition to that, nothing else has ever superseded any of these documents, meaning there is nothing else afterwards. There was no agreement, no treaty, nothing. The only treaty that we have is the treaty with Jordan, also the treaty with Egypt, but that is a different, not relevant to our conversation this evening. But the treaty with Jordan, when it was signed, relinquished any claims that Jordan had to the west of the Jordan in favor of the Palestinian people, who don't exist as a national or legal entity. So Jordan essentially said, we have no territorial claims west of the Jordan River, and you solve your own problems. But they left us with the problems. Until 1988, all Arabs living on either side of the Jordan had Jordanian citizenship. Jordan, in an act of violation of international law and the Geneva Conventions, revoked the citizenship of all Arabs living to the west of the Jordan, leaving them stateless and creating for Israel a problem that it has no ability to solve, or has said it has no ability to solve until today. So what other issues become clear now that we've examined these documents, and being the only documents that pertain to the legal status of the West Bank, Judea and Samaria? So I've put them down here on this page in short form. The next few slides will elaborate on them a little. First of all, what we've seen is that there are irrevocable Jewish rights. The second thing is that there are exclusive Jewish rights. The third is that there are unrelinquished Jewish rights. And the fourth is that there has never been any conflicting claim of national rights by a pre-existing sovereign. So now let's look at each of those issues one by one. The first, the historic, religious, and cultural claims of the Jewish people were recognized as unique, exclusive, and irrevocable in each of these international treaties, in each of these international documents, which means the historical connection, the religious connection, and the cultural connection of the Jewish people to the land of Israel as a whole, and certainly to all of the land west of the Jordan, and Judea and Samaria are no exception, were recognized by international law and unanimously voted upon and accepted as fact by the nations of the world going back to 1920, or even before 1919, essentially. Now, the fact that they are recognized would not necessarily mean that they are exclusive. But the language of all of these documents indicates that there were no provisions made for any other historic indigenous people, because the rights that were to be protected for people who were present at the time in the territory were considered private, personal, civil rights or religious rights of communities, not of nations, not of indigenous peoples, but of communities that happen to be existing on that territory at the time. So not only are the Jewish claims unique, they are also exclusive, and they are irrevocable. You cannot change history. And the rights that have accrued to the Jewish people are based in history. Another thing that's important to point out is that all of these documents predate the Holocaust. So for all of those people who say that the state of Israel was created as a reaction to the Holocaust, that's just plain ridiculous. Those who would claim that there was some sort of guilt after World War II that they tried to pay off at the expense of the Palestinians, that's a ridiculous claim as well. That the Palestinian nation pre-existed the state of Israel. There was never any mention of such a nation. There were never any claims. And in fact, the Palestinian Arabs voted in Jericho, at the Jericho conference, they voted and pledged allegiance to Greater Syria and to Faisal, and said he was the king of all the Arabs, and there was only one Arab nation, and it stretched across all of the territory involved. So the claims, again, the historic, religious, and cultural claims of the Jewish people are unique, exclusive, and irrevocable. The second point, as I mentioned, there is no other nation in existence that has a competing claim for national sovereignty. Recall again that the previous sovereign, the Turkish Ottoman Empire, ceded all claims, and by law in 1920 at San Remo, that was one of the main points of the conference, was the complete withdrawal of all territorial claims by the Ottoman Empire. And they signed it, it's in law, and they've never made territorial claims since, although we have other problems with the inheritors of the Ottoman Turkish Empire, and that's certainly a talk for another day. So there is no other competing claim for sovereignty. And again, the state of Israel's territory has never been a sovereign nation, independent sovereign nation for any people other than the Jewish people in history. The third point is that no subsequent treaties have altered the internationally recognized border between Israel and Jordan. And that's just simply a fact. And the fourth, as of the ratification of the San Remo Resolution and the dissolution of the Ottoman Empire in April 1920, there has been no sovereign other than Israel. So very, very often you will see, as in an entire arm of the United Nations and almost every UN document, even those that have absolutely nothing to do with this part of the world, they make reference to the occupied Palestine. The problem is that there has never been a Palestine. As you know, the state of Palestine does not exist, and therefore it would be impossible for a state that doesn't exist to present a competing claim of sovereignty. That is the sum total of international law. The documents that you have seen tonight with me constitute international law in its entirety as it pertains to Israel's ownership title to all the land west of the Jordan. Israel cannot be considered an occupier of its own territory, and Israel cannot be considered anything but the clear and unequivocal owner of Judea, Samaria, and all of Jerusalem, all territory to the west of the Jordan. What our claims might have been east of the Jordan, we we withdrew very, very long time ago before the establishment of the state. We therefore have no claims. But in the words of former Ambassador David Friedman, sometimes on a playing field, you move the goalposts and you keep moving them further and further back to the point where they're no longer on the playing field. All of these documents constitute clear statements of law, and the more that we allow them to be forgotten, the more that we allow them to be shouted over or ignored, the further away from the truth we get, and the further we bury Israel's unequivocal historic rights and legal rights to all of the territory west of the Jordan. That is the presentation. I'm going to go into the chat and see the questions, but while I'm doing that, I encourage you to maybe take a screenshot of this or come back to this when we put up the recording. If you're interested in following or reading any of our reports, any of our research, following us on any of the cases that we go to court with, or any of the things we pursue in order to protect Israel's legal rights, also to stay abreast of the progress of the translation of this massive legal tome that I mentioned. All of those things you can find on our WhatsApp group, on our Telegram group, on Twitter, on our Facebook page. We put up videos, explanatory videos of all sorts of cases that we're involved in on Instagram. And our website has full text, downloadable or shareable full text versions of all of our reports on all of the many, many areas in which we are active. Now I'm going to go into the chat and see two questions. Those two maps aren't the same. The first map doesn't include the Negev or southwest part of Transjordan. I'm not sure which two maps you're referring to, but someone else here wrote, watch the last 10 minutes of some sort of YouTube. I don't know what the subject is, so I cannot actually recommend it. Don't know what it is, but there weren't a lot of questions here. I hope that is because the presentation was clear and not because it was so unclear that you don't even know where to begin. But in either case, I'm going to stop my share now. In either case, I'm always happy when people reach out with questions, comments, suggestions for topics for future webinars, and any comments or suggestions that you had about tonight's presentation. We will be, as I said, sending out a recording that you can review and share if you feel it is worthy. And I encourage you to definitely follow us and support us if you can. It's very, very important to us that our materials on which we work very, very hard are shared as widely as possible and brought to the attention of people who have a position of influence, either media people, social media people, politicians, community leaders, activists of any kind. We make all of our resources available, and I really hope that you will avail yourselves of them and be in touch and stay informed. Thank you all very much, and we look forward to good news and total victory quickly, and have a healthy and fulfilling winter.